legal setbacks that Trump is facing, from the Supreme Court to an attorney general who has just kind of flubbed the most basic question about the job's requirements. We begin, though, with the Supreme Court, because that's more than what the government is saying or what the DOJ is struggling with. This is real action, and it is another loss for Trump. The court today declined for the second time to even hear Trump's bid to try to overturn his losing verdict, which determined that he was civilly liable for sexual abuse against E. Jean Carroll. He owes $5 million. Now, the court had rejected Trump's attempt back in June. You might recall, if this all sounds a little familiar. And Trump has had to pay the $5 million verdict plus interest. So he is losing money, losing cred, and losing something that bothers him a lot, which is the ability to bend this often conservative court to his will. So that is an example of the system going forward and working on a matter that we know Trump cares about. Then there is his new Attorney General Blanche. Now, he has been saying that he will kind of try to be a solid, credible attorney general. He's certainly offered words of affirmation, if you will, about aspects of the job, but then couldn't even say how independent he would be from this Trump White House. That is, of course, a basic minimum job requirement of being attorney general.
Can you pledge that the Justice Department will always act independently of the White House?
Well, there's a big difference between saying we will always do our job and investigate any case and act independently of the White House. No, I'm not going to pledge that. And no attorney general should ever pledge that.
Fact check, false. Most attorneys general have pledged that repeatedly. Certainly in confirmation battles where, of course, we are used to people saying certain things just to try to get the job. But as I've noted, and I will repeat something that is important, it's become quite common or popular to say that Donald Trump, at least among certain liberal Democrats, they say is the worst thing ever of all time forevermore. But there is actually nuance here. In Trump's first term, his first attorney general actually was so independent that he famously appointed Bob Mueller, and we all remember how that went. So even in the Trump era, let alone a traditional Republican or Democratic administration, DOJ independence has at times held up. So point one, false when Blanche says that. Point two, when he says no one should ever pledge that, he is doing what people call gaslighting or trying to just sort of overdo it. Instead of acting like he's on defense, he's using a rhetorical position of, and this is very lawyerly, of, who would even say that? Well, Mr. Blanche, everyone who's ever held your job except apparently for you. Now, we are talking about, of course, the fulcrum of Donald Trump's efforts to corrupt the government, because the DOJ is sort of the first line of the rule of law. And we saw that in the fight over their efforts to abuse the court system, the settlement system, and the DOJ to give Trump an immunity that no president has ever had from, say, tax review and past audits, as well as take your taxpayer money and give it to convicts. Now, Blanche had to stipulate that that fund for that money is not moving forward. That was one of the conditions to him even getting Republican votes. But now this is how he sounds.
Can you guarantee that under your Department of Justice, anyone who attacked the Capitol on January 6th will not receive one dime of taxpayer money if they file a claim against the federal government?
Well, anybody can file a claim against the federal government, not just anybody associated with January 6th. Beyond that, I'm not going to comment about hypotheticals of what will happen in any of those cases.
So potentially they could get paid under another stream of government funding, but not the anti-weaponization fund.
When you say they could get paid, what is their claim? Is it somebody who pled guilty?
The Justice Department's judgment fund.
No. So right, but when you say they could get paid, anybody who sues the federal government could get paid.
This is the sound of a government official trying not to offend his boss, who we know still wants to give out that money, while having also had to compromise and surrender to political reality. So that's what it sounds like. It sounds sort of vaguely, like he's in his own deposition, if you've ever seen one of those, and someone won't answer any questions straight up. The discomfort you can kind of read in his body language is that he is caught, I would argue, between those positions, and that in a very real way, the Senate and the rule of law won, at least for now, in getting him to commit in writing to not misusing the money that way. And yet there he is still with Donald Trump. And this is so strange, extreme, lawless that it bears repeating, Donald Trump still wants to have employees who are willing to give out money to convicts as long as they agree with MAGA or will do anti-democracy crimes. It sounds like a criticism, but it's not a criticism in the sense of opinion. It is just the facts that we are dealing with. The New York Times, meanwhile, reporting on a probe into a fundraising firm that was basically co-owned by an individual tied to the judge in that Trump case in New York, where Trump was found guilty of those felonies, although he was not ever adjudicated for anything involving a jail sentence. And that all came in the strange position where he was a defendant and a candidate and ultimately, of course, won that election. According to a grand jury subpoena reviewed by the Times, the DOJ wants this firm to basically turn over its communication with clients, including what they argue are, or they believe to be, communications with Harris, Biden, Hochul, Jeffries, the DNC. Now, to be clear, that could just be what is sometimes called a fishing expedition. They might just believe communications to exist, or because we are talking about the federal government and a lot of power here, they may have already determined somehow they think that stuff does exist. Now, whether that is a fair review or an extension of the retribution campaign can only be answered in context. The fact that those people are Democrats or critics of the president doesn't mean they can't ever be reviewed and investigated under the rule of law, to be clear. But when you look at the list of targets on your screen, you see the melting credibility of AG Blanche and the DOJ. And that is one where judges have already started to be more skeptical of these kind of investigative requests, because look on the left at all of the aborted failed attempts to go after critics. Those are the green stamps. And on the right, cases that are continuing, some still going to trial, where we know the DOJ has clearly statistically targeted opponents rather than just pursuing evidence wherever it may lead. Now we have an attorney general who is a long ways from, as I mentioned, the first term or Jeff Sessions, and who won't even say on record that they won't do the thing that he wrote down they wouldn't do, which is hand out your money to criminals, among other problems. I want to bring in Andrew Weissmann, former FBI general counsel, who worked on the aforementioned Mueller probe, of course, and an MS Now legal analyst for us. Andrew, I wonder if you want to put these two stories together. The Supreme Court doing what, of course, you should just do under law, but what angers Trump so much, Trump appointees and Republican appointees not apparently shredding the rules to give him special treatment in that case, and then this new AG.
Well, let's start with the new AG. Todd Blanche's performance on Meet the Press, to use pejorative adjectives, is somewhere between smarmy and deceitful. The idea that he would say that the president of the United States has never asked and would never ask for a particular person to be investigated or prosecuted. Well, we've seen it in black and white. That he has done that. So the idea that he's saying, oh, it's fanciful and it's some left-wing conspiracy is false. You have pointed out other things that he has said that are just false. The idea that that the Department of Justice shouldn't be independent. Now, if he had said, when it comes to policy matters, the Department of Justice is not independent, that the president can weigh in on that. But that's not what he said. And he knows darn well that the point of Kristen's question was, is it appropriate for the president to be weighing in on who should be prosecuted and who should not be prosecuted? Right. And let's just think back to do a little bit of whataboutism.
Well, I'll let you finish, but we pulled, our team pulled that moment. So in the spirit of Exhibit A,
let's go
that you're drawing us to, let's watch, and then you'll walk us through it.
Yep.
If the president asks you to do something that you feel crosses an ethical or legal line, would you do it?
The president will never ask me to do something unethical or legal or illegal. He never has. He never will. There is this extraordinarily false narrative that the president wakes up in the morning and calls me and says, Todd, go prosecute X or Y. He does not do that. He has never done that. He will never do that.
Of course, we saw him do that specifically with Pam Bondi. And the idea that the president wouldn't do that. And we also know, let's just get back to Trump 1.0, that he famously said to James Comey, the FBI director, why can't you let sort of Michael Flynn go? Why do you have to prosecute him? In other words, he has no problem crossing that traditional line that no Republican or Democratic president has crossed, which is you do not weigh in on who gets prosecuted and who does not. What I was going to say is just to do a little whataboutism. Do you remember when President Obama got in so much hot water for just saying that Hillary Clinton, who was then Secretary of State, would never try to obstruct an investigation, meaning that he didn't think that she was doing the email, fiasco and scandal was not within a bad purpose. And people were sort of rightly upset because they were saying the president should not weigh in on that. That is an independent decision for the Justice Department. That is all gone. That norm is gone. And the idea that Todd Blanche is sort of bobbing and weaving and can't just answer directly to Kristen's questions in a truthful and forthright manner tells you not just about him, but it tells you what's going on with the justice system in our country right now.